And then you'll edit. Oops. Or
yeah,
okay. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
Okay.
My name's Chasen. Can I get your name again?
Sure. I'm Anthony Ocampo. I'm a professor at Cal Poly Pomona.
Oh, I didn't know you were a professor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Can you tell me, I guess, what cultures or like countercultures you identify with?
I would say that I have a lot of different identities or a lot of different hats. So as I mentioned, I'm a professor, so I consider myself to be a teacher, an educator, a professional. Of course, I grew up in an immigrant neighborhood in Los Angeles, so my parents are Filipino, and so Filipino is a big part of my identity. I am also gay, and so, it's been an interesting time to be open about that identity because you've seen the world change from under you. So those are all the different identities that I can think of that come to play.
Just right off the top. How does a little bit like I introduced a little bit what occupational therapists do.
Mm-hmm.
Like I guess how does your culture affect different aspects of your life? Like I guess rest and sleep. Do you have like different traditions before you go to bed? Do you think that most people are maybe just particular to your culture?
Yeah, when it comes, gay people have very different sleep habits. No, I'm just kidding. No, in terms of sleep and work, I wouldn't say that there's any major differences because of being Filipino or being gay. I would say maybe being in my 30s is the biggest difference because when I was in my 20s,
we're filming.
So,
Sorry. I'm gonna take the dog away.
okay, that's okay. We didn't warn you.
Sorry.
Yeah, he's an occupational therapist.
Oh, nice.
So you guys should exchange info because he's thinking about going into that field.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We can definitely talk about it after. For sure. Let me go get the leash.
Sorry. You just gonna splice it or should we?
Yeah, I'll cut it later.
Okay. All right. So I was like, okay.
You mentioned that you're in your 30s and that's different.
Yeah, I think in my 20s, God knows I would never go to sleep before 2, 3 in the morning. Ever since I turned 30, it seemed like some magic wand was waved, and I'm like, it's 11 o'clock, and why am I awake? So I'm in bed by midnight on the regular. So, yeah.
Because I'm still in the 20s, like I don't see myself going to sleep before 11. So.
There you go.
I see. What about like different aspects of like education?
How does that affect?
Or even just being a teacher, maybe the process you went through, getting your degrees or finding a job.
Oh, how does my culture affect those different things?
Yeah.
Up front, I went from growing up in Los Angeles in a predominantly minority neighborhood to going to Stanford, where, I was one of 3 Filipinos in the entire 100-person dorm. So, it was a big culture shock, and that in and of itself isn't bad, but there were a lot of moments where I would, in class, you're talking in class, and you share about your family or your life, and people say things like, oh, that's weird, or that's different in a way that makes you feel self-conscious.
Oh, right.
And I think that affects your confidence. Over time, though, I've had a lot of different professors that have taught me to think of my cultural differences as assets. So, hey, you came from an immigrant family, you came from, you are a gay person, you're a gay man of color. What blind spots, the other blind spots that people have, what are you able to see because you weren't part of this mainstream crowd, So I think that being on the outside looking in has allowed me to have more empathy about problems that people are going through, to be able to recognize when people feel excluded and intervene. Especially as a teacher now, I see a lot of students, I can tell from their facial expressions that they feel uncomfortable, and I recognize that was just like me 10 years ago. So how can I do something to help them share things that the other students could learn from?
Definitely. Just that growing up having a different perspective allows you to see a different.
Yeah, you lived in South Dakota for a couple of years. I'm sure that coming from here to there is just a trip.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are a lot of messed up moments, but now that you're here, you can bring a little bit of South Dakota culture here in some ways.
Drag back some of that snow.
So,
what about like in leisure activities or social participation?
That's a good question. Well, again, as a gay person, I'm really into shopping and... No, I'm just kidding. I'm quite the opposite. You know, I think that in terms of my culture, both cultures are pretty diverse. So, that, you know, the Filipinos I grew up with loved hip-hop and DJing and basketball, and I wasn't into any of those things. I was really into swimming, tennis, and so I think that it affected me in the sense that I always felt like I was the only one of my kind in a different in these like swimming or tennis environments. But sometimes that's frustrating. Other times you're like, oh, cool, you know, I get to represent for the whole crew.
Right.
In terms of being gay, I think, as you know, most social activities, at least in the like prior to now, are oriented toward straight people. So if you go to a bar or a club, generally it's going to be about spitting game to the opposite sex. If you rewind and think about high school, most proms are all about the prom king and the prom queen. And so that has been actually that's played a bigger role in the way my life socially has been organized, because, you know, there are moments in my earlier days where to be gay would get you beat up, or, you know, have people call you names, to say the least. Nowadays, it's weird how it's like the cool thing. It's like the cool thing to be. So the times are changing.
So I guess like you notice that it's like a drastic change. So
yeah.
Like, how you're treated? Is it like?
You know what? Let me put it this way. A couple years ago, I had friends that, you know, knew about me being gay and were, you know, they kind of hid it, or they tried to be like, oh, at least he's not like those other gay guys. It's crazy to see those same men on Facebook making their profiles like the rainbow profile, you know what I mean? After the Supreme Court decision.
Oh, right.
And so, yeah, it's been a drastic change. I mean, in my own family, my parents were not pleased when I told them, but they've since come a long way in terms of accepting me, accepting my relationship, and, you know, it's been great. It's been great to see the changes. So,
what assumptions do you think healthcare providers make about you based on your culture?
Healthcare, that's a tough one. I know that there's a lot of, I know a lot of gay, lesbian, I don't know that many trans individuals, but who, when they go to their doctor, they can't help but feel their doctor is making assumptions that they're promiscuous or drug users. It's sometimes not said out loud, but you can see it from their face when they open up about their sexual orientation. They see the tone of the doctors change. Mm-hmm. So for me, I would like to see doctors do small things like how many sexual partners do you have? Are they male or female? Almost like normalizing certain types of questions.
What about you specifically, though? Like
me?
Do you like what do you think? Those same assumptions when you have to talk about your sexual orientation?
I sometimes think doctors or healthcare providers think that, and so I work really hard to do my research. Okay. Sometimes, like Kaiser, doctors have profiles and you can read what their expertises are, and I try to read in between the lines. If someone says they work with, you know, certain types of patients, then like ethnic communities, or then it signals to me that they're more open. Or I think for mental health providers, it's really important too that they're upfront about their ability to talk through difficult issues of race or sexuality.
Definitely.
So,
in your culture, like what stereotypes are true, or that you find to be,
true
more often than not?
You know, with Filipinos, I think there's a stereotype that we eat really poorly. We have a lot of fried foods, and I think there's some truth to that because a lot of the ways in which the culture bonds is through eating, with like many different groups. I think that some of the foods that we have are really unhealthy. Like there's this one bread dessert thing my mom used to feed me for breakfast, and it was essentially cake bread, sugar, butter, and cheese, which as
breakfast, right?
Yeah, as you can imagine, is the breakfast of champions. So, things like that, and so those stereotypes are so tied in with the culture that it makes it hard to make changes. But in terms of being gay, I think I don't think that any of the stereotypes, like being more promiscuous, being more likely to have, STDs are true. I think that it just gets more publicity when those things happen compared to heterosexual folks.
Yeah. So,
I don't know. I wouldn't say any of the stereotypes that I know exist. I wouldn't want to say they're true because it kind of fuels people's. I don't want to fuel anyone's perceptions.
I mean, none of them are like always 100% true.
Yeah,
of course. Any that you think that are out there that are untrue, that just like.
Oh yeah, I think the idea. I think the idea that all gay men have the inability to be monogamous or promiscuous or sleep around, or are drug users. I think those are totally untrue because Lord knows I have a lot of gay friends who are super boring and super square, and I try to be the bad influence, and I can't. But it's I think like any group, people come in all shapes and sizes. But I think it's important to know that stereotypes exist and not overlook them because they still affect the way these folks are treated, I think it would be a disservice to pretend the stereotypes don't exist and then, you get blindsided when someone treats you that way.
Yeah.
So.
Because to so many, stereotype is the truth to them. Then they just don't know better.
Yeah, it's really messed up, and I think that's great that this class assignment is actually helping you talk straight up about stereotypes instead of pretending that we don't have them. And what can we do when that stereotype turns on in our head? What can we do to correct ourselves?
Right.
I mean, you've seen the news with Ferguson, Missouri, or Eric Garner in New York, or Charleston. All these terrible things that are happening, and I think it's highlighting how important it is for us to be open about talking about race, because when we're not, things happen. And then same thing with LGBT rights. To overlook them would be, I think, a mistake. So.
When receiving healthcare,
What
areas do you think of your culture do you think healthcare providers should address or always keep in mind when interacting with you?
I think that one of the things they should keep in mind is to never, no matter whether we're talking about being from an immigrant culture or being from gay culture, is never shame people for what their culture is all about. So I've seen some healthcare providers say really disparaging things about, say, Mexican Americans' eating habits or African Americans' eating habits, and rather than think of that as that's part of their culture, how can we tweak that a little bit to make them more healthy or have them have better choices in their eating habits? They stigmatize them, which I think just works to make them not trust healthcare providers.
Instead of saying, that's wrong, It's like, here are some better choices.
Yeah.
Here.
So if I were to be totally comical, like with Mexicans, like if a doctor's like, you can't eat tortillas, they're bad for you. If you eat them, you're digging your own grave. That would be terrible.
Right.
But to say something like, I know in your family tortillas, they're just here to stay. So what can we do about portion control? What can we do about the stuff that goes in the tortillas to, you know, add more vegetables or, you know, cook the meats a little differently, so you still get part of your culture, but you still do things that are better for your health.
Yeah. Just put the focus somewhere else.
Yeah.
Not so much on the negative. But
Yeah, I find people, even in my classes, students don't respond to being infantilized and treated like children, so.
how have healthcare providers addressed your culture in a meaningful way?
How have they addressed culture in a meaningful way? Well, I think that, you know, I don't know. I think that, because I'm a younger age bracket, health problems haven't been as common for me, but from what I do like seeing is when I see outreach for, say, diabetes or, say, outreach for heart disease. I like when these groups provide pamphlets or information that are culturally specific. You know, it can be little things like the patients they put on the flyers are of that person's background. It makes it more familiar to someone when they pick it up. It could also be explicitly talking about traditional foods of those cultures that I think would be worth talking about and creatively tweaking them to make them more healthy.
I didn't think about the pamphlets. But
yeah, I mean, when I see a Filipino face or like a same-sex couple on a commercial or anything, I get super excited about it because I'm so used to not seeing that it feels really nice to know that. It tells you that there's someone in that organization that's thinking about this stuff as opposed to like overlooking it.
Just like making an effort. Even
Yes.
You know, it's just a picture, but like it really is more than that.
It makes a bit. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. It's baby steps, I guess you want to say. It's just someone making an effort out there.
Absolutely. The effort is I think the first step. So.
How is cultural awareness relevant to receiving high-quality health care? Yes.
Well, I mean, the LA Times, there's an article that said Latinos now outnumber whites in the state of California. So I think it's going to be necessary for doctors, occupational therapists to be more culturally competent, because there are certain cultures where the idea of asking help is a scary thing, or it's not seen as the best thing, or seeking healthcare. I have friends whose parents don't have legal status; they're undocumented, and there's a lot of folks that are in that category that are just straight up afraid to go to the doctor because they think they're going to be reported or deported. So I think that just building bridges. I think if healthcare professionals go out into communities, make themselves known as people, not just authorities, that will improve things for everybody.
How does your culture view the LGBTQAI?
Let me see if I get it straight. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, asexual, intersex. Although A could also be ally. Yeah. So, okay.
Nailed it.
Well, what's funny is that in the gay community, I think even in the gay community, there's a lot of work that needs to be done about inclusion for LGBTQAI folks. So, for example, I've seen a lot of moments when gay men have been discriminatory against gay women, or gay people be discriminatory against trans folks because they don't have the same health concerns, medical concerns. It's just I've seen a lot of problems related to that. I think within the Filipino community, there's this sense that you can be gay, just don't talk about it. And I think that that's not a good thing, because what it does is it conditions people to feel ashamed of who they are as opposed to celebrating who they are. But I think it's not just Filipinos. I think it's something that's widespread amongst all groups.
Yeah.
So,
I'd say for the most part, like, usually parents aren't like hoping that the kids are gay. Like,
nowadays it seems I have friends that are, but yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's not. It wasn't something people are like, yes, I won the lottery, but you know, I think they're gonna have to learn how to be like that. Tolerance isn't enough. You know, it's not enough to be tolerant. You gotta embrace and celebrate people's differences. So,
you just mentioned in the Filipino community, it's okay to be gay, just don't talk about it.
you know, I've seen that. It's like this tacit acceptance, like, you know, and it's not just Filipinos. I've seen it with Latinos, African Americans. It's just that, and even like whites, right? It's okay to be like, to have a partner. Just don't, you know, wave a huge rainbow flag in our face.
We just don't want to see it.
We just don't want to see it. Yes, that's exactly it. And so, I think people are gonna need to not do that anymore. So, because even tolerance it still leads to negative consequences in terms of self-esteem and, you know, pushing kids to do high-risk behaviors. I've interviewed a lot of kids where, you know, 20 years later, they're crying about the way their families have treated them. You know, it sticks with them. That trauma sticks with them. So
definitely,
mm-hmm.
You know, just being able to express, you know, in whatever form you have to, but like just being able to express yourself,
yeah,
it helps you you know, be who you are.
Exactly.
It's like, so, yeah.
I mean,
if your family or friends are just telling you not to, it's like, you can't just hold it all inside.
Exactly. So, cool. I think that's the last one.
That's the last question I have for you.
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, don't edit this the wrong way, please. So.